What's up, boys? Tricks Ridiculous back with another video. You've been asking for it, so I've got it here. This is the Melee Kate Bishop Devil May Cry, absolutely Nightcrawler, Psylocke, whatever you want to call it. This is the build if you want to play a Melee Kate Bishop. This build is really, really fun to play. In my experience with it, it's a little more difficult to play than the ranged build. If you've watched my previous ranged build, you know, it's literally just scatter shot. You might as well blindfold yourself and just keep spamming scatter shot and it'll just clear all content. This build's a little bit trickier to play. You kind of have to micromanage your abilities and your cooldowns a little bit more. So it's a little more complicated, but for those of you who are, looking for a little something different, this build's really, really fun to play. Definitely give it a try, and it really doesn't take much to get going. So we're going to just kind of go through, like I always do with these builds, just go through the skills, go through the gear first, then go through the skills, just kind of show you, what I'm using, why I'm using it, and maybe some other options you could use as well. And then just end off with a little bit of gameplay. Before we do, be sure to like and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow, and I greatly appreciate it. But without further ado, let's get right into it. So what you're looking at here, this is my loadout for my Melee Kate Bishop. Now, really what this build focuses around, you've probably seen it in other videos and on Reddit or wherever else, but this is what's going around in the community. It's the Hawkeye's bodysuit. I'm using this on my other build as well, on my range build. It's absolutely, I think, the best piece on Kate. It's such a broken ability. People are talking that it might get nerfed. I don't think they're going to nerf it, but it's really, really, really strong. Basically, anytime you use your blink jump or blink dash, or you kill an enemy with a blink attack, you get 4 seconds of your super. So you'll be in your ultimate for 4 seconds, and there's no internal cooldown on that. So you can just blink again and just refresh that cooldown for 4 seconds. While you're in that, you get an increased damage and you get the quantum sword. So you'll be swinging your sword and you'll be sending out those quantum waves that'll be hitting multiple enemies, all the while having basically infinite energy to teleport around, use your intrinsic teleport attacks, and just be kind of all over the battlefield, sending out shockwaves, meleeing everybody, and just being an absolute ninja. So really, really cool. So really the Hawkeye's bodysuit is really what makes this piece work, or this build work, I should say. I wouldn't even try to build a Melee Kate without this piece. It seems like this is absolutely what really brings it over the top. Without this, I honestly am not too crazy about her melee attacks. They're a little bit kind of blah for me, but when you use this and you're constantly using the teleport attacks and blinking around, and sending out those quantum waves, then it gets a lot more interesting. So go ahead and get yourself this Hawkeye's bodysuit. You can get it from Elite Vault missions. Just keep grinding until you get it. It's absolutely worth it, and you'll be able to fly around infinitely. So you can really use it on any build. It's really, really fun to use. So as far as the actual stats and the perks and everything like that, so I'll admit that I'm not perfectly geared out for this. I have been grinding like crazy, and I can't seem to get any might red artifacts. It's just been quite the grind. They're extremely rare. It's funny, I seem like I get them all over the place on every other character, but when I want them, I can't get them. So it is what it is. What I would prioritize, obviously might, being extremely important. And then I would probably go Valor and then defensive stats. Those are really the pieces there. We're going to be trying to keep, obviously, a damage buff up as much as possible, if not all the time. So we're going to be critting pretty consistently. So having high Valor, if you don't have like the highest of might, you can kind of substitute a little bit of Valor. You're not really getting too much out of the ultimates, because her ultimates don't really do a lot of damage, or her heroics, I should say. They don't really do too much damage, but you do get a lot of crit damage as well. So you can see with my Valor, I'm just almost at 300% crit damage. Really, really good, because once we have that damage buff up, basically all our attacks are going to be crits. I think you do get a little bit more bang for your buck out of just pure might. So if I had, 2 purple red ISOs here and my might was at like 300, for example, I think I would be doing a little bit more damage than just having Valor stacked. But even still, when I'm consistently critting with a damage buff up, the sword swings really consistently get about 50 to 60k on pretty much any enemy. So not blow your socks off damage, but 50, 60k per sword swing is a good amount of damage. And remember, you could swing that sword, 2 times a second or so. You probably get a full combo in about 3 seconds, I would say. And you're hitting multiple enemies at a time. So it's definitely not something to sneeze at, and especially when you're using Warp Arrow, which I'll kind of explain that wombo combo in a second. Pretty straightforward, but obviously you use the Warp Arrow, get all the enemies in one place, and then you start shooting that quantum wave out of your sword right through all the enemies, and it's doing 60k per swing to every enemy. You're going to be clearing out mobs like you don't even know what's going on. So that's all really good. And then I would just go, Resolve Resilience. Obviously, Resolve always first in our defensive category. Resilience secondary. I would go a little bit of Resilience. You don't want no Resilience because you do get a pretty good benefit between 0 and 100. So if you get like 100 Resilience, that's a lot better than 0. But if you have like 200, that's like you're not getting much more than if you had 100. It's the returns are pretty diminishing. So don't worry too much about Resilience, but Resolve is nice to have. You'll see just in a second how we can actually work around having some Resolve, because Kate, even though she's a little bit of a squishy character, with just her general defense, there are a few perk pieces on your gear that you can get that can actually give you some pretty nice damage reduction. So we'll talk through those. But otherwise, proficiency can be nice. You don't really need it, like I said, as long as we're proccing that damage buff. Having that crit is pretty easy. We don't have to worry too much about it. And you'll notice that Kate Bishop, I don't think this is something a lot of people know, but she has pretty high crit chance, I think, anyway. If you look right here, even just with 49 proficiency, our perk chance is only 14%, but our crit chance is up around 30%. Normally with characters, when you look, their crit chance and their perk chance will be kind of level with each other, but in this case, her crit chance is actually much higher. So she definitely does get some good crit chance anyway. So just to go over the rest of the gear, nothing I have here is really too crazy, but I'll show you kind of what pieces you could get that could really be better. So I'm using just a lightweight buff blade. This piece is just a Valor Might, so it just has good stats. Chance light combo finishers grant a damage buff. That happens pretty frequently. We usually get to our finisher. If we don't, we have other ways to get a damage buff. But the other nice piece there is Duelist Boon. Definitely look for this. This is 15% increased crit attack chance from sword attacks. So literally just a flat 15% chance from your sword attacks. In fact, now that I think about it, that might actually be why she has that intrinsically higher crit chance on this other screen. So disregard what I just said. I'm not doing another shoot of this, but that crit chance is up around 29%, probably because of this. Actually, if I switch it off here, let me look. Yeah, there you go. It goes back down. So there you go. So actually, make sure you do get the Duelist Boon, because that 15% intrinsic crit chance from swords, that's going to be money on your melee attacks. Coming over to our ranged piece, I really don't have anything too good here. I'm just using this because it has might and a little bit of proficiency. Honestly, it's the best piece I have just for this. I could go with something that maybe gives a little more defense, but I just went with what gives the most melee possible. I very rarely even shoot arrows. The only other thing you could do is have something like your targeted buff arrowheads, where just hitting an enemy with a ranged crit grants a damage buff. That would be nice to have if you're struggling to get a damage buff. That way you can just shoot a few arrows, get a damage buff, and then start going crazy with your sword. Personally, I don't think I need that, just because of the 15% attack chance here, and then some other ways that we actually get damage buffs. So I wouldn't sacrifice stats. I would just try to get something that has might or valor, and just kind of good stats there. We already went over the Hawkeye's bodysuit, but from the Quantum Shroud, once you're in the super, you have that Quantum Shroud. You're actually taking 20% damage reduction. So that's also just another nice way to actually get some damage reduction if you're struggling. You'll notice my defense rating is pretty low. It could probably go a little higher if I'm being honest. But right now it's not the highest. But having that extra 20% bonus damage reduction does help. And then coming over to the charm here. So this is a nice piece that I have here. So it's got Valor and Might. So obviously our two major stats there. It's got a lethal buff, which is really nice. A chance defeating enemies grants a damage buff. So just another way. So if we don't get to our combo finisher all the time, especially because we'll be blinking around a lot, we'll at least get that chance when defeating enemies to get that damage buff. And it does trigger pretty often. So we'll be able to keep our damage buff up between that and the light combo finisher damage buff. We'll be able to have it up pretty regularly. And then Aerial Blessing is actually not something to scoff at. Increased crit chance for mid-air melee attacks, especially when you're using the sword with the quantum kind of waves coming out when you're in your ultimate. You can even just jump like a foot in the air and start sending out those quantum waves at basically ground level. And they'll hit all the enemies on the ground that you're aiming at, but you're still going to they still count as, aerial mid-air melee attacks. So you'll actually get that 11% crit hit chance from them. And like I said, you literally have to be like a foot off the ground. So that's really useful. If you don't have a piece like this, what you can also use, and also if you need a little more defensive help, you can use the Hawkeye's charm here. This one also comes from Vault Mission, similar to the Hawkeye's bodysuit. It gives might and proficiency, so those are good stats. And then what it does here is it actually gives Shroud Effector, so another 30% increased damage absorbed by the Quantum Shroud. So that'll be another big damage reduction. Again, if you're struggling with your defense, we're going to be in that Quantum Shroud pretty much all the time. So having a pretty big defense bonus from that would be quite nice. And then it does also give Rampage Protection, which defeating 3 enemies in rapid succession does grant a defense buff. And, if you don't know kind of the new trick with the defense buff, with Rampage buff, basically it says defeat 3 enemies. You could literally shoot 3 crates that have resources in them and you'll get the buff. So it's pretty easy to get that up, and that defense buff is extremely powerful to have. So if you don't need, like I said, I'm using this just because it's a nice other way to get that damage buff. But if you can consistently get your damage buff, through your blade, maybe you have melee crits, have a chance of proccing a damage buff along with crit chance, that would be the god roll. If you can get that and you don't need damage buff over here, feel free to go with this, because getting that defense buff as well, if you can have damage buff, defense buff up pretty much at all times, you'll be invincible and you'll be walking through like Super Saiyan, absolutely destroying everything. So this is just another nice piece to have. But otherwise, you can really use whatever piece you have available. Obviously, it was a little tricky putting this build together just because a lot of the pieces I was looking for when I was originally building Kate were obviously for ranged, and a lot of her pieces do kind of complement her ranged abilities, but it's just kind of tricky. But if you're just going for the stats you have or the stats you need, go for might, go for valor, go for a little bit of defense, and then just try to keep up a damage buff at all times. Don't worry about the battery effect. Kate really can't do the battery effect effectively. So I don't even bother with it. You can, if you want, get something here. You can see this one is like heavy combo finishers, inflict plasma. That's not great. I might even prefer like power attacks, or maybe light combo finishers. But honestly, it's really not anything too crazy here. If your teammates are impacted or inflicting any type of element, maybe try to counteract it, but that's way overthinking this build. Honestly, you'll be fine without it. And honestly, most of her consistent element does come from her arrows as well. So having what I'm saying, like when you're using a melee, if it's light finishers, do the element, that's only going to be one attack doing the element. It's not like someone like Thor who has signature attacks where he can just always use his hammer spin, right? It's a little different for other characters, but something like for her range, when you have, every single explosive arrow you shoot does shock damage, that's a lot easier to spread elements, right? So I wouldn't worry about elements too much on a melee Kate. Again, just make sure you keep up that damage buff, keep blinking around with that Hawkette's bodysuit, and really just try to, stay alive. That's really it for the gear, and you'll probably be fine. Like I said, for the minor artifacts, I'm using a couple of yellows that I was lucky to get. I haven't been able to get 2 reds. 2 reds would be ideal, but if you don't have them, 2 yellows will be fine, or even just blue, red, and a yellow maybe. Or really, whatever you got that can give might, even if you're using something like these Norn stones, like you'll see this one here gives might and proficiency, like that'll get you through it. It won't be ideal, but you'll still be able to play the build. You might just be doing a little less damage, that's all. And then for the major artifact, this one's interesting. So I'm actually going with the Sacred Nornstone. You can go with the ring. Obviously, the ring, is the best in the game overall. But I think the Sacred Nornstone is just a little better for this build, at least for me, just because it's not as easy as the ranged version of the build to keep up your damage buff. So if you saw my ranged video, every ranged crit can just give you that damage buff. So you can just get it all the time. It's constantly up because you're shooting 5 arrows every half a second. You're going to hit crits. You're going to get it triggered. It's a little tougher with the melee build because you have to either hit it, for me, either a light combo finisher or defeat an enemy for a chance of it. So that's why I'm using this to actually give it a 4-second boost so I can keep it for 15 seconds instead of 11. That way, it's just up a little bit more. But like I said, if you are absolutely 100% keeping it up, you have no chance. You've got like a God Roll melee piece that can keep that damage buff up indefinitely. Then go with Ring of Nebelung. At that point, you're just gravy on the train there. So Sacred Nornstone to make it easier on yourself, but in a perfect world, use the ring. So that's it for the actual stats and gear. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments, but let's take a look at the skill tree. All right, boys, so here we are with the skill tree for melee Kate Bishop. So this is the specialty tree. This is the mastery tree. Feel free to take a screenshot if you'd like. But basically just going to kind of go over what I'm using, why I'm using it, and what you could use instead, because there's actually a little bit of customization to some of these. Not 100% sure that what I'm using is absolutely perfect, but it's what I prefer to be using right now. So starting with the decoy ability, so we're actually going to go with Quantum Field in this case. So standing near the decoy, you're granted the benefit of the Shadow Jacket ability, reducing incoming damage by 35% for 3 seconds. So that's pretty nice to have. The Shadow Jacket, you'll see right here, excessive quantum energy from the warp arrow converts to a defensive barrier, which temporarily absorb 20% of damage for 3 seconds. But when you use it on decoy with this ability, you actually get, you and your teammates get 35% incoming damage reduction temporarily. So that's actually pretty nice. We're not really super reliant on our decoy. We're more using it to actually just be a decoy. So we kind of just throw it out passively and then go crazy, with melee from there. So just having a little bit of defense, like I said, kind of in the gear, overview, my defense is not incredibly high. So having a few extra pieces here that can grant a little more defensive ability are nice. Bringing me to the right side here, which is Healing Light. So 20% chance the decoy can generate regen packs as it deals damage. Defeating enemies, increases that chance. So you can basically just turn it into a little bit of a fountain of regen packs. Pretty nice just to kind of get some of that healing. Like I said, really between this, and then one other ability up ahead, it's really all Kate has in terms of healing or any type of defensive abilities. So you have to kind of use what you can when your defense is really low, especially for a melee build. If this was a ranged build, I would not say this because obviously you're not in the fight, but the way Kate is, you kind of have to be, in the fight. From a melee perspective, warping around, doing other things, you really could use a little bit of healing. Now, if you are Super Saiyan God mode and you're the best player that's ever played this game, and you never get hit regardless, then feel free to use, these right here. The only other ones I would use, if you absolutely don't need the defense, I would use Cover Fire, which kind of rapidly fires 3 shots before moving on to the next enemy, and then just use the the probability matrix, so you get the charged quantum arrows that will detonate. So this will be if you're going with a little more of an offensive decoy. We are running, and especially, if you're like me, we have a really high Valor rating. So this is going to be, it's not like bad damage. It's definitely going to be pretty good damage. Definitely nothing to scoff at. But overall, I don't think the decoy really does too much damage, and we're really more focused on the damage that's coming out of our sword. So again, for me, I'm using some defensive abilities on the decoy. If you feel you need defensive abilities, go with these. If you feel you do not need defensive abilities, go with the middle tree here. Coming over to the Assault Heroic, this shouldn't surprise anybody. We're using Singularity with an additional arrow. Really shouldn't come as too much of a surprise. It's honestly the best piece in her kit. And, especially with, what we're going to be using with our ultimate, which is the Quantum Scythe, those kind of blades or energy projectiles are going to be absolutely money with Singularity. So when we're in our ultimate, we're sending those out, we group every enemy up, and then we absolutely demolish them with the scythe, because again, it's going to cut through everybody. Everyone it passes through is going to take that damage. So we're really going to be absolutely slaying everybody. And then having, of course, the additional arrow, no brainer there. We want to do this as often as possible. Which brings us, of course, to the ultimate. So Quantum Scythe, I shouldn't have to explain this one. It's really the bread and butter of this build. It's why we're even using, melee Kate. It's absolutely awesome. Turns your Kate into such a fucking ninja. Total badass. And again, with that Hawkeye's bodysuit, we're in our ultimate all the time. So as long as you're warping around in some way, shape, or form every 4 seconds, you will always be using this Quantum Scythe. It's going to be your primary source of damage. It's going to be up infinitely. So to benefit from that, I'm using Quantum Accelerator. So this actually makes it so your Assault Heroic energy builds 50% faster while Quantum Overdrive is active. Now, you could use Quantum Magnifier for a little extra damage, but honestly, it's only 10% more damage. It's really, really not that much. Honestly, I think you get more bang for your buck. Again, remember, like, if we were just using our ultimate as an ultimate, maybe we were using it on bosses, then I would say, okay, yeah, Quantum Magnifier, that sounds great, right? But the fact that the Hawkeye's bodysuit lets us keep that ultimate up indefinitely, we're basically getting 100% of the time 50% faster Assault Heroic, right? So the fact that this is always active, we have to take advantage of a 50%. That's 50% faster. That's half. That's double the speed, right? So if you got one a minute, instead you get one every 30 seconds. That's insane. That's like a massive cooldown. And so the fact that, we're going to be in our ultimate always just from blinking around, even when we're just traversing the map, it's a no-brainer. We have to take advantage of this massive cooldown. And then, like I said, because we're using the Quantum Scythe with the extra warp arrows so we can store 2, and, of course, Singularity, it all plays together. We're always in the ultimate. We're constantly getting the warp arrow cooldown. We're constantly shooting our warp arrows. We're constantly using the Quantum Scythe to blow through all the enemies that are trapped in the center. It's honestly the best way to crowd control as a melee Kate build. So this is absolutely what we're doing here. So coming over to the mastery tree, so these some of them are pretty straightforward. Some of them are just kind of, however you like it. But I'll start with just what I'm doing. So increase crit attack damage while juggling enemies in the air by 20. I'm using this because, like I mentioned earlier, even if you just do like a quick jump in the air, and then you start using your sword and you start sending out those projectiles, it's going to count as mid-air attacks, right? So if you have a piece that gives like mid-air crits, that's great. You can even get those on like your ISOs. And then you could just do a quick hop in the air, start shooting those out at ground level enemies, and they'll all be taking that increased crit chance. And then here you go, you got a little increased crit damage as well. Competitive streak, damage from all combo finishers. Honestly, it's the best one in this column for this. Stun damage, not super necessary. You can use it if you want, but I think just a little more damage on the combo finishers is better. And then demolition charge arrow, we don't really use. Heroic takedown, no brainer there. We always want heroic takedown. For the ranged, I'm actually just using all of the top ones here for the razor arrow. The reason being, we're really not using our ranged at all. So all of these other ones don't really do much for us. If we're really going to use any ranged piece at all, in any way, shape, or form, the only thing we're really going to do is the disruptor arrow. And what that does, if you don't know, once you kind of get that disruptive buff on an enemy, it lasts for 6 seconds, and then it increases the crit chance from any source by 25%. So that's nice for bosses. There's actually a really, really good piece that you can get out of heroic hives called the Archer's Charm that can increase that from 6 seconds to 9 seconds and additionally reduce enemy defenses by 30%. So that's really, really powerful for single target damage. For a melee build, we're not really a single target monster anyway. We do kind of have to work for our boss kills with this build. It's more of kind of just a badass crowd control, feel like a total boss warping around the map. But if we're going to use any ranged at all, it's really just going to be the disruption arrow. So that's why we're just speccing into these here. Coming over to the intrinsic ability, so quantum precision, this one's great for us. So increased crit attack chance of your intrinsic light and heavy attacks by 15%. So that is when you're holding the R2 and then you're kind of, pressing either square or triangle or whatever controller you're on, and you're doing these are technically your intrinsic attacks. You're going to get extra crit chance on these. And this, remember, when we're in that quantum shroud, we're going to be having essentially infinite intrinsic energy, so we should really be using these quite a bit. You'll notice in the gameplay I do use these quite a bit, and I really do use the heavy one as well quite a bit, which is wherever it might be. I think it's this one actually. Yeah, the triangle, and you do the down smash. It's absolutely fantastic. It breaks block. It does a ton of damage, especially when you're critting with it and you have that extra crit chance. Really, really powerful. So extra crit chance here on those light and heavy attacks. For this one, damage of all intrinsic attacks by 20%. Pretty straightforward, just more damage for those attacks, and then reduce the actual cost of them. So I like this one. You can also use stun damage. The only other thing is, because of the Hawkeye's bodysuit, you can essentially keep it up forever. So the reduced cost might be a little redundant, but it's just going to kind of, reduce the amount of times you're going to have to blink. You still have to blink around every 4 seconds, but with this you can really spam those intrinsic attacks. But if you don't have a problem, or you have more intrinsic energy than you need, go with the stun damage. Again, I don't really care for stun damage. I don't even have any intensity on this build. We're not really looking to do too many takedowns. If they come our way, we'll do them, but otherwise we're not going out of our way. So we're really just focused on damage here. And then for the intrinsic overcharge, so this one is another one. When your overcharge meter reduce the amount the overcharge meter is drained when taking damage by 20%. This one's okay. It's really the best one in the tree. Again, the defeating enemies while overcharged adds 1 second. That's not necessary because we can just blink and get it right back to 4 seconds, right? So not super necessary. And then again, status meters, not super necessary. We're not focused on we're not focused on status effects. We have no intensity on this build, so we're really not worried about status meters. Increase the amount of overcharge gained by all combo finishers by 10%. this one, pretty much everything in this tree doesn't matter. We don't care to build our overcharge meter just because we can get it with our Quantum Shroud anyway. So not super important there. And then crit chance, for all melee attacks while overcharged by 10%. So again, more crit chance while you're overcharged. So you're going to be critting quite a lot in this build. That's why, Valor is very good. Obviously melee, might still also very good. Just, adding some flat damage to your crits, that's going to be good as well. But really, Valor, melee, those are what you want. These are the skills you want. And that's pretty much it. Like I said, this build is definitely very different from the ranged build. If I'm being 100% transparent, I prefer the ranged build. I think it's more powerful, but I think this build's probably a little more fun. You might get a little frustrated because it is tricky to use, and sometimes the warps can get a little, not buggy, but just sometimes you'll end up facing the wrong direction after a teleport and you start swinging the wrong way. It can get a little annoying sometimes. But realistically, it's a pretty badass build. And you really do, once you're kind of in a rhythm, you're teleporting around, the enemies couldn't touch you to save their lives, and you're just totally all over the place, swinging your sword, slicing and dicing. Once you're really in a groove with that, then the build really becomes fun to play. So that's all I've got for you guys. I'll leave you guys with some gameplay footage, but otherwise that's pretty much it. Again, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and check me out. Follow me on Twitter, follow me on Twitch. I do stream on Twitch just once a week right now, but probably gonna end up doing more once some more end game content comes out and we can do some games with viewers. Definitely always willing to play with anybody on stream, so check out my Twitch channel as well. But other than that, guys, I'll leave you with some gameplay. Let me know in the comments if you're playing a Melee Kate or you plan on it, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.